for the last 8 years in different capacities, I've had the chance to work at a great community-based organization that does everything from school-based mental health to working with foster youth to working with probation youth. And this organization has an incredible CEO who never says no to any of my crazy ideas, new ideas on how to help youth. And she's been a great mentor and a great friend. And I like to show up whenever she asks me to. And that's the CEO of Lincoln, formerly Lincoln Child Center, Lincoln. That's Christona Mertz, who's, I'd say, literally responsible for me being here today. She's like staffing me outside the door. And it's just an honor to, say a few words about my good friend, Alex Briscoe. Everywhere he goes, I go. We've known each other 20-some years now. We both worked for AmeriCorps organizations in Philadelphia. We met in that work, and then somehow we both ended up in the Bay Area at about the same time. Let's see, Alex where did I follow you first? Alex makes this decision one day that he's just gonna walk into a school district in Oakland, and a high school in Oakland, and become a volunteer. And in a few moments, he becomes sort of a counselor at the school. And I happen to be working for a nonprofit that does tutoring and mentoring for the students at that same high school. And so we bump into each other in that capacity. And then when I go to work at Lincoln some years later, Alex is running the behavioral health program in the healthcare services agency. And so we just keep showing up in the same places. And I know that when I see Alex, I know I'm in the right place because he's an innovator. And I know that the subject is, the conversation about how do we collaborate across our sectors and our systems. And I've never seen anyone do it better than Alex Briscoe. And he'll tell you about all the school-based health centers that he's helped to create. His mind is just like a motor, it's always moving. And I think it requires that kind of thought and energy to really help us just figure out if the young person is at the center of everything that we do, how do we get past, the way we've always done it? How do we get past, well, this is my turf? How do we get past, this is my bucket of funding? And just keep looking at the young person at the center of what we do. I think about that all the time. I think about my own experience and how, what systems, was I in. A lot of you have heard me tell my story. I was born in the Bay Area. I was born in Monterey at Fort Ord when it was Fort Ord, now CSU Monterey. We got any Monterey folks up in here? Yeah, we got one. She's like, yeah, I'm here. My mother was an immigrant. She emigrated from Panama. My mother was a teacher and settled in San Jose. My father emigrated all the way from Detroit, Michigan, by way of Mississippi, and was a soldier who was deployed to Vietnam. And as a young person, I didn't see my father for 30 years. I found my father on the internet just before my 40th birthday. He talked about trauma. He didn't use that word, but he said that he suffered physical and mental scars in war. And so that was him explaining to me his post-traumatic stress disorder and his experiences. My mom raised 4 kids by herself, and until she could not. My mom was very sick. My mom had cancer, and when I was 6 years old, she lost her battle to cancer. And so the 4 of us got split up. 2 of my siblings stayed in San Jose where we lived, and the 2 youngest went to live in Philadelphia with a cousin that we'd never met until we showed up. It's funny because now, for all these years working at Lincoln, we have a kinship program. But when I grew up, they didn't call it that. They just said, you're going to go live here. And I didn't know this cousin until I showed up on her doorstep. Could you imagine a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old showing up on your doorstep that you've never met before, and you take them in and raise them as your sons? With no supports. There was no, well, I guess we had a few supports. I was on the free lunch program at my school, and I got teased by all my friends for eating the free lunch, and then I became an adult, and I realized everybody in my neighborhood and my school was on the free lunch program. When I went to the grocery store, I had a food stamp coupon, not the EBT card. I care deeply about what's happening with CalFresh. I think about it all the time. I got teased for having the food stamp coupon, and then I realized everyone in my neighborhood was on some form of public assistance. I ate so much government cheese, I thought USDA was a brand name. You know, some of y'all know what I'm talking about. She said, now, you had to cut through this box, like this long, this thick plastic, you know, and if you could get through that, you could make yourself a great grilled cheese sandwich or a quesadilla or something, but, you know, and it lasts forever. I got some in my trunk still, right? I'm sure they did not serve you any of that great government cheese. I mean, those are the systems that you know, I was in indirectly as a young person, and I would say that they did help my family. They ultimately helped my family overcome poverty. But my cousin was an incredible person. She was determined that her kids would have a different experience than her. She also was an immigrant. She worked 2 jobs and went to night school. And she, when she graduated with her AA degree, she had her 2 little boys standing there. We had these big old, you know, bow ties and, you know, ruffled shirts. I'll show you the pictures. She was sending a message that, you know, higher education is possible. Same thing, when she took her diploma from Temple University, she had us there. And I think she was role modeling for us that we could get more education. She role modeled so much that she filled out the application for me to go to Temple University. I don't think it was much of a question, oh, you gonna go to college. But she is an unusual person in that she found ways to get these things done without a lot of resources, without a social worker. And you know, and so I think about my own trajectory in becoming a social worker. I started in the Child Protective Services world. And every single family that I worked with on my caseload had been in deep poverty, long-term poverty. And every single family that I worked with had had an experience where their educational experience was not that good for both the child and for the parents. And unfortunately and sadly, almost every single family that I worked with, either one or both parents had experienced substance abuse issues. And so I thought, we got to change the systems that impact our family. I felt like I was putting a Band-Aid on a problem and realized very quickly that I was overwhelmed and under-resourced and under-informed and poorly trained to really support families who were being held down by systems. And I made the decision to become a social worker, and I wanted to change the system. And I got to grad school, and they said, well, I said, I want to do policy because I want to change the policies that impact our families in these ways. And they said, well, what does that look like for you? And they said, well, you got to figure out your own field placement, which I did. And it led me to the California State Assembly. And it gave me the opportunity to introduce legislation to send $35 million to 30 different school districts to do things like community schools. I believe deeply in the community schools movement, and you know, that we give students the opportunity to have health care, mental health care, a meal, whatever it is that will remove barriers that get in the way of their ability to learn. You know, I'm proud of the legislation that I passed that expands the free lunch program in California for 400,000 more kids to have access to a free and reduced lunch. Because how do you learn when you're hungry? Every year in the legislature, I introduced a bill to do school-based mental health because, you know, I believe that kids come to school with trauma and need to have access to someone who can support them. I don't know how this happened, but after working at Lincoln for 4 years and then getting elected to the state assembly, I came to the Capitol. And when you're a freshman legislator, you never know where your office is going to be. You find out on the day that you arrive. And so I take the train up from the Bay Area every day, and on the train, my staff's saying, hey, boss, you got a great office in the Capitol. And I said, what's so great about it? They said, you're going to be in 5150. And I thought, how is it that the social worker who just spent 4 years working at a school-based mental health organization gets assigned to an office number 5150? And I thought, you know what, I'm going to take that as a badge of honor, right? And say that we should be doing more to reduce stigma around mental health in this country and in this state, right? And so every year I introduce a bill on school-based mental health. And every year the Appropriations Committee, which is the committee that makes decisions about basically killing any bill that asks for money And I'm like, I don't get that. We kill our own bills. I'm like, wait a minute, we are the legislature, right? We have to have the political will to provide for the people. And they said, well, we don't have any money. I said, well, let's spend the people's money on the people who need it the most, right? That's why we're here. Anyway, every year the appropriations bill will say, committee would say, your bill's not going to make it because we don't need any more school-based mental health programs. I said, what school have you been in lately? And they said, well, the school district and county health systems don't talk to each other, so we don't want to support this. I said, well, you're going at it in the wrong way. If you want it, you can incentivize those relationships. And so in my bill, we said that if anyone will get the funding, they have to partner. It has to be a partnership between the school district and county health. I said as simple as that. And Chris Stoner was one of the people who gave testimony to the folks at the Appropriations Committee to say that this can be done and that this is a real need. And of course, they killed the bill anyway. But if I'm allowed to serve as your state superintendent of public instruction, I will sponsor a bill to bring more school-based mental health dollars to our school districts. And I'll bring you all up to the committee to give testimony. Okay, raise your right hand. I'll swear you in right now. Because you all know that our students need access to mental health programs. They need access to school-based programs and resources. They need access to health care. When I was on the school board, we, in one of our schools, we actually built a state-of-the-art dental clinic because many of our kids were experiencing illness and it was getting in the way of their ability to learn. And so, I can't describe it in the way that Alex will, how you build these, cross-sector collaborations, but in my kind of crazy bill-making kind of way, we've tried to touch in different areas. We've tried to do more in mental health. We do more around education in community schools and meal programs. Part of my time as a social worker was spent working for kids and adults who have developmental disabilities. And it was at the time when we had some of the greatest cuts in the state. And so all I saw was this fight between the school district and the regional center over whose responsibility it was to pay for the needs of our students. And so this is what we've allowed it to come to, that we now have pit sector against sector, and we're fighting over the same little pot of money. And this is very common in education, that now the early educators feel that they're pushed out from the conversation from the K-12 educators, and that we're fighting for the same few scraps of dollars. And then the higher education folks feel like they're not getting any support either. I mean, California, sadly, is 46th in the nation in per pupil spending, even though we're the 5th wealthiest economy in the world. I think our kids deserve better, and they deserve to be number one. And I want to change the narrative. And, oh yeah, this is not the campaign speech, right? I keep forgetting. They're still counting votes, so I'm not really sure what my destiny is. So I'm like, get in there and give that speech and go to work. And my point is this. We can fight over the same bucket of dollars, or we can change the narrative and talk about what it really costs to provide a quality education in California. If you read the report, Getting Down to Basics 2, that was recently published, this is a collaboration of lots of researchers, Stanford University and other places, where they talk about how much we should really be spending for a quality education in California. They say that we are woefully behind where we should be. We should be chasing New York and other states who spend sometimes double what we spend in California. That's not a political statement, that's just a fact. This is a fact-based program. And so we should be looking at education as a continuum from early education through higher education. Because we all know that if we don't do more to fund early education, we're going to continue to see the school-to-prison pipeline expand. And I say that I introduced a bill that would put a tax on private prisons in our state and force those proceeds to go to places like preschool and after-school programs. Because I think that we should educate, not incarcerate, our kids. And I just think it is sad that we spend $6 billion in the state on companies that profit off of incarceration. And so I introduced a bill that says tax every one of those companies that makes a profit off of incarceration. Until we get a universal preschool program in this state, tax them and make them pay and invest in our kids so we can educate and incarcerate. Because I know that given how my life started, it would have been very easy for me to fall through the cracks. It would have been very easy for me to end up in California State Prison, and instead I ended up in the California State Assembly. I want us to give that to all 6 million of our kids in the great state of California. And so, so I'm looking forward to what comes out of your conversations in this gathering that help us figure out how to get out of our silos. Where I was going about the money is that in 2020 there will be a ballot measure where we'll all be asked to vote on creating kind of a split roll tax around Prop 13 that would say big corporations have to pay their fair share of property tax and to provide us revenue that would provide this state with $11 billion more to support all of our needs. And $6 billion of those would go directly to K-12 education. Now, please do not leave here and say, Tony Thurmond said he's going to raise my taxes, because I did not say that. This is a measure that would protect seniors from paying any more taxes. This is a measure that would protect homeowners from paying any more taxes. This is a measure that would protect small businesses from paying any more taxes. But it would close a loophole that has existed since Prop 13 passed in the 1970s that basically says, you know, how many of you are homeowners? Raise your hand if you're a homeowner. Okay, so your property gets reassessed all the time, right? The county assessor reassesses you and you pay more money. If you're a big corporation, you don't get assessed that way. You're assessed when your property turns over and when you sell it. And so if you're a big corporation that never sells, you're still paying property taxes based on 1970s values. Like a major corporation in my community, I represent Richmond and Berkeley and Oakland. There's a multinational corporation in my community called Chevron. And Chevron is still paying the same property taxes that they paid based on their assessment from 1970s. You could hiss at them. Go ahead. But what they've done is that they've robbed our community and our state of needed dollars. And so the split roll tax is going to create a way to close that loophole and give us $11 billion in the state.